cannabis space. And we're real excited to be up here in the Oregon market and working with some real smart entrepreneurs and some real savvy investors to create some really wonderful opportunities in what I feel is the greatest thing going on as far as industries go today. And if many of you are like me, you're either repurposing some talents in some way to come in the industry, or you're exploring some options that haven't been available to you in the past. But I welcome you on being here and being part of, adopting this early enough on to take full advantage of the momentum of this wonderful industry again. We've got a fantastic, really intelligent panel of experienced experts up here that are going to be able to address and answer any questions and concerns you have. And I will go ahead and let everybody get started with an introduction. First and foremost, Alan, why don't you go first?
Okay, great. Hey, I'm Alan Abramowitz, professional chef for 25 years. I run a company called THC Partners, LLC. We're licensed in the Washington State 502 processor. I'm in the middle of building 3 separate facilities right now in multiple states to handle edible and edible productions. I've spent a lot of time working for Wyndham International, Hilton, and Princess Cruise Lines, building restaurants for them, running large facilities. And hopefully I can help with some of those questions about kitchen facilities and food productions. So do whatever I can to answer any questions you might have.
I'm Craig Henderson with Apex Supercritical. We manufacture CO2 extraction equipment out of Johnstown, Ohio. I'm actually located out in Denver, Colorado. We have a sales and service center out there. I've been with Apex as an engineer for the past 2 years, and my role nowadays is more post-processing, helping people take raw cannabis oil out of the machine and turn it into finished use products that are sold in dispensaries. So I'm here today to answer questions on that if you have any.
And again, I'm Aaron Silverman, and as far as my experience goes, I've been working in the cannabis space for over 10 years, doing consulting, educating, owning and operated 2 dispensaries, launched a delivery service, established a few brands in the industry, and have helped consult on the opening of several other businesses and establishment of other brands through the edible space or dispensaries or just retail in general. So I'm going to be talking a lot about the application part of this and where I can lend some value to writing an application or applying for a license, for a processing permit, and where its value is going to be in the retail market. So I think what the best way to get started is some of the most frequently asked questions from the Oregon Liquor Control website, and I'll go ahead and start off with some of these. And some of you I was able to collect some questions from before the seminar started, therefore I got a feeling a few of you are going to have the same questions, and we'll open those up at the end. So according to the OLCC website, the CO2 machines have to be run in a spark-proof room. However, if you turn it on in a spark-proof room, it's no longer spark-proof. And how would you meet that requirement without violating another? So I'm going to let Alan speak on this first.
Well, actually, even on the website itself, it says there will be exceptions for reasonable situations. So each inspector is going to look at it differently. One of the ways we've overcome this is we build a separate mechanical room with an insulated wall in between. So that our generators, our cooling units, our pumps are all actually located away from machines. It's kind of a little bit overkill. If you have the ability to plan out a full facility and not adapt something that already exists, to plan out the mechanical for that facility is really the safest way to go first. And looking at safety first, looking at where your mechanical is before you try to jam a CO2 extractor into the corner. If you don't have that ability, then reasonable risk. And honestly, I would ask the inspectors, I would ask them up front, hey, this is what we're going to do. In our facility, we invited the fire department in before we ever even put up the first wall. We said, here's our plan, here's our intention, what would you like to see? So we were already ahead of the curve as far as what they were expecting to see, and we built it to their spec. So when they came back to inspect us, they said, oh, well, this looks beautiful. It's exactly what you asked us for. So, using the government tools to work for you in these kind of situations really help and save you a lot of time.
Real quick show of hands, how many of you are currently working in the industry, in the cannabis space right now? And how many of you are looking to enter the space? Great. Well, that's a nice even balance. Perfect. Great answer, Alan. I think another thing I want to touch on that you said was, telling the inspectors exactly what it is you're going to be doing. It's important not just from a safety perspective, but it's a great way to start building trust through transparency with these inspectors when you're applying for certain things, you're trying to do things. It's a learning curve for them as well, and sometimes the wall of ignorance might be a little too high for them, and they're less likely to approve something or work with you on something if they're not understanding it themselves. So the better educated you are about what you're doing, and the more you can disclose to them what it is you're trying to accomplish, the more likely they are to work with you and help you get and navigate through a process that can not only be daunting, but time consuming. And in this industry, if it costs you time, it will cost you money. I'll say that, and that's applicable to anything.
On that note about the spark-proof room, all these extraction equipment in Oregon, Washington, Colorado, they've all gone through the same process. All the states at first require the spark-proof room, and then the engineer, third-party engineering peer review states that you don't need it. At least for CO2, you don't. For butane, propane, it's understandable you would want a spark-proof room. So these machines have engineering peer reviews with them. So if you present that engineering peer review to your inspector, whether the fire department, the health department, put them in contact with the actual third-party engineering group who did the peer review, they should help be able to educate the inspectors. So you should be able to get around that. We do not foresee spark-proof rooms for CO2 equipment. That's just ridiculous.
Any questions on that specifically? We pretty well cover that. You guys familiar with the two different types of concentrates, between solvent and solventless? Maybe I'll touch on it real quickly. So you've got, a couple of different types. You've got, your solventless, which are, your bubble hashes, your, pressed hashes, your rosin technology, where you're combining pressure and heat in order to extract certain oils, like traditional essential oils. Then you've got your solvents. You've got things like butane. You've got, propanes. You've got ethanol, and you've got your CO2s. From a retail perspective, here's how I look at that is, what you start processing on a regular basis is going to be most important, that you not only use a process and identify one that you can manage and understand and continue to improve, but you can also do it consistently, because ultimately you're going to produce a product that's going to reside on the shelf, and it needs to be done consistently, not just from packaging, but from the processing end of things. And the type of room you do that in, and the type of environment you do this process in is going to be very, very important. So I've noticed that, in my own opinion, and from a retail perspective, CO2 solvent, extractions tend to be more and more popular these days based on, where the community is going in the forms of ingestion. But I think, Craig, you could probably really speak to some of the more popular methods as well.
Yeah,
what you're seeing as far as.
Right. Just like he said, CO2, it's marketable. If you're standing in a dispensary, and you have a choice between butane oil or CO2 oil. Intuitively, if you don't know any better, it just CO2 sounds safer. So without being fully educated, you're going to think the CO2 is safer. Most people who are doing butane and propane do a pretty good job of purging it. As long as they're doing what they're supposed to, it should be safe. But the average consumer doesn't know that. So what they see, when they see CO2 oil, it's more appealing.
Yeah, on that note as well, whatever you're doing in your process, you're going to want to expect to disclose on your packaging, as far as, letting the consumers know, what's in the package inside and how it was processed, and think about the types of things you're going to have to put on there. I'm not pushing one way or the other, but I would suggest you consider the language you're going to use on your packaging and what you would want to ingest yourself when you pick something up off the shelf. And even if it was purged, as well as it could be done with butane on it, you still got to put that on the package. So consider that as well when learning about a process and identifying the right one. But at this point in time, there's some really cool ethanol processes that I've seen being done in Southern California that are extremely clean and in some shape, way, or form better than a lot of the CO2 processes that I've seen. But I don't think they're being done enough, and there's not enough of it to I think take the CO2 off the market yet. So I would definitely learn that process itself and figure out how you can start to master that. Maybe, Craig, if you want to, just talk about some of the keys to success when doing a CO2 process, rather than maybe some of the others, as far as what's important to not have in a room, or what you would want to make sure you have. Things like moisture content, things of that nature.
Right. Okay. So CO2, butane and propane people run wet material occasionally. CO2 doesn't like wet material. So to increase yields, decrease run times, dried ground plant material is the best. To avoid pulling chlorophyll, the trimming process is also important. You don't want to wet trim. So putting your wet material into a machine trim machine, you're going to release a lot more chlorophyll in your end product. So we recommend dry trimming. Hand trimming obviously is better than machine trim. And then the product that goes in the machine also should be dry. There's this new thing, fresh frozen, that everyone's talking about, or live resin. So that's possible to do. Just keep in mind, when you're running wet material, it is a little less efficient in CO2 extraction, so it might take longer. The yields might seem lower than if you're using a butane or propane process. Any questions on that subject?
Would you recommend slowing down the process and compromising a little bit of yield in order to encourage better quality on a more consistent basis? Or pump the yield out as much as possible to try to create market share?
It just depends on what you're into. If you're an edibles company, you're not trying to make a good looking color or a good looking flavored oil. You're just trying to get as much product out as possible. So those guys prefer high pressure, high temperature, like he said, just knocking it out as fast as possible. If you're trying to make shatter or the live resin or something tasty, it looks good on the shelf, then you will. You'll have to sacrifice time and probably yield to achieve that.
And don't be afraid to do that, because at the end of the day, what you're putting on the shelf, like I said before, it needs to be done consistently, and it needs to be able to be, trusted, because that's how you're ultimately going to build a brand with your customers, is through that trust, and that's where brand loyalty gets developed. So even though you're processing it behind the scenes, you're still bringing it to the shelf, and you're still building a customer base that you want them to know what to expect each and every time they come in and pick up your product, or if they refer it and recommend it to someone else. So it all matters in the end, and you need to consider what it is you're doing and what your end product is going to be, and therefore determine a process that's going to work best for you. But yeah, definitely don't compromise the yield or rush the process just to get more out of it. Figure out what you're trying to do, because it does matter. Another question on the website, which is a pretty good one: would prepackaged foods require ODA licensure? Alan. Good for you.
Yeah, the bottom line, if you're not a professional chef, you may not know how to make these things in bulk. Yes, you can buy items and infuse them. All items need to be purchased from a licensed facility. Another USDA regulated license. Each state has different regulations. The USDA considers most marijuana edibles considered food processing because you're bulk processing in a wholesale environment and selling it to a retailer. So that puts you on a different level than your local health department as well. So different rules apply. But everything from a grain of rice into your sugars and flours or what have you, all have to come from approved vendors, approved facilities. Nothing made at your house. No grandma's jam with some pot oil in it. But back to the CO2 thing real quick. One of the things that we'll do, like something we're messing around with, is the flavor of the oil. All ingredients count, all flavors count. So when you're adding pot oil or CO2 extraction in there, you have the ability to remove some of the terpenes. So you can actually make it a little less flavorful. It's a high concentrate, so it takes such a small amount. You shouldn't have to taste pot in your candy anymore. You shouldn't have to taste the weed flavor. You can if you want to, if you want that option.
Yeah.
But we should be able to get to that point now where, hey, it tastes like a delicious brownie, and that's what it tastes like, and not a thing full of weed. So the CO2 extractors definitely have a really finite ability to really start separating some of the terpenes and really deciding which ones you want. And that's really the next advancement in technology in animal production, is making the extracts to be the flavor we want them to be when we're adding them into the edibles based on the product we're adding them to.
Yeah, it's definitely become an interesting, crafty science, especially when it comes to the terpene profiles and the flavor profiles, because it does all matter. When you're shopping for those types of ingredients, before you start to process, consider at the same time you want to be able to put on a package what you're putting into the process for your customers. You also want to consider what you're getting from your vendors in order to process this yourself. It all goes into it at the end of the day, and whether it be your flavor terpene profiles and or the ingredients that you use, you want to be able to explain it. You want to be able to put it down on paper and tell someone that's what you did, and you stand behind it. And more so, you want to be able to replicate that process over and over, especially if it's a good one. Did you want to add anything to that, Greg? No. All right. Another good question is: the ODA differentiates between a kitchen and a bakery, but does the OLCC differentiate between the two?
Yeah, and this one actually stumped me for a second because I'm in the Washington market and I've done some work down here as well. But really the answer is no. All the information is actually on their website. In the food world, in the restaurant world, yes, there's a difference between a bakery and a restaurant and a retail store and having. But according to the OLCC, the control board here, it is just considered a kitchen. There isn't a separation, so it's not if you're doing baked goods or savory goods or anything like that. There is a ton of information on their website. I highly recommend clicking around it. There's more information I was expecting, and it's actually quite easy to access compared to some other states, and really should take advantage of it at all costs.
Yeah. Storage of edibles. This is going to be something that's real important that you understand, not just on your end of things, as far as how to store your product for processing point of view, but when it finally gets to the shelves, you want to be able to make sure your product gets turned over to the retailers with the education that they need to know, that they need to have in order to store your product appropriately and be able to then, put it on the shelves, display it correctly, and educate their customers on it on your behalf. So it's real important that part of your process comes the education of how to store your product too, whether it's with you in your custody or it's on a retail shelf. You can make a great chocolate bar, fantastic, and by the time you bring it to the retail shelves, now they're sticking it in a refrigerator somewhere, and all the moisture is coming out of the chocolate bar, and everybody that buys it sees a white powder on there, and they start to wonder, what is that? And they start to have less trust in that product, or maybe there goes some brand loyalty building opportunities, and it could have all been circumvented with a little bit of education on how to properly store that product and what type of temperature and what type of environment, or where not to store it, or how not to handle it. So those are important things you're going to want to really take into consideration too when creating your product is, what's your product going to be when you process it, when you finish the processing? How should it be packaged? How should it be stored? And how are you going to educate everybody that takes custody of that from you on those same practices, the storage, the packaging, and everything. So if you guys have anything to add to that, I know from a culinary standpoint, it's probably pretty important as well to make sure ingredients are preserved correctly so that they are what you expect them to be once you go to make a product, like your chocolates and your dark chocolates. And
Well, absolutely. Reliable sources and transparency. You should know every ingredient going in, and you should be able to communicate that with your customer. We all want to look at the ingredient label and find out what we're eating. We all want the nutritional label on there. Above and beyond too. Tell the story. Tell the story about where it came from, or the farmer that picked it, or what have you. The more information you can provide to the public about the ingredients, the more popular you're going to be, the more safe you feel with your brand. Really building that trust. Trust is a two-way street. You can build that trust up. One incident of irregular dosing, or an odd flavor, or a melted chocolate. I had a very important life lesson a few years back in the medical world in Seattle. I ran my own edible company there, and all my lollipops were melting all over the damn place because it got to about 85 degrees in Seattle. Well, nobody had air conditioning in any of these stores. They had a box fan in the window that was hot. And after about a week straight, sugar starts melting. And it was very important to come up with a solution to figure out how to handle that, to stay in business. Here are great products on the shelf, but chocolate sitting at 80 degrees or 85 degrees on a glass cabinet, it's not doing anybody any good. It's not selling your product, and it's really actually harming your brand, if anything. So, being aware, just because you sold all your product doesn't mean that's the end of your job. You've got to follow through with it. Different states have different distributions, but if you're having someone else distribute it for you, what's their quality assurance? How are they going to assure that your product is the best product out there and is maintained properly? It goes with oils, extracts, bud. Nobody likes getting a sack of dry, crappy wheat. That's all quality. And following it through to the very end is what's going to secure your brand and your business to really make sure that you build that customer base that you want.
quick show of hands, how many of you are planning on entering from the edibles space, as far as processing all the way to edibles? All right, how many of you in here have ever had the experience with that brownie from years ago that pretty much turned you off to edibles, or turned somebody else off to them from years ago? So we all know that person, or we were all in that position. Well, so consider that when developing an edible or a brand, or entering from the space from that angle, is you've got, everybody's got that experience at least under their belt, or they know someone that does. So the trust factor is going to be the most difficult to build through the edibles. But it's also probably the most important that you do that through through transparency, letting them know your processes, your ingredients, and being able to talk about it. Because now that we're starting to get into meter dosages and being able to regulate that a little bit more, we're all the way down to micro dosing now, so that people can really have a safe way to kind of try a form of ingestion without having to smoke or take on that experience of that that brownie that was just too much. And so through that is going to come the education of it. But being able to have these properly stored, and being able to build that sort of trust, because you have a trusted product on the shelf that remains consistent. It's going to take you doing as much homework as you need to do to understand it, and then sharing that level of knowledge and education with those that take custody of your product, because they're representing it too, which I think is what we're trying to hit home. Small example is if your product needs to be in a fridge on display, and for some reason there's part of that ordinance that says they can't have edibles on display in refrigerators, you got yourself a problem. You need to be able to create a solution with that dispensary. Hey, listen, these need to be stored in a fridge. If you can't have it up front, can we provide one for you in the back? If you don't have it, my product isn't going to look the way I need it to. And the customer buys it. So, take that into consideration when you're, reading through the rules and reading the guidelines and, working in certain areas. Little things like that can affect you. So, I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. What about, Alan, have you found that there's been anybody getting away with being able to use, say, a commercial grade kitchen from like a restaurant at night to go in and make their edible goods? I'm sure a lot of folks have tried it in order to, minimize their spending, or maybe, Craig, you have?
It would be a really lovely option if we were allowed to use shared commissaries or shared restaurants or what have you. But currently in all the laws I've reviewed, I haven't seen any options in there for not Colorado, Seattle, Colorado, Washington, or Oregon, where you can use a shared space. It's all security. And if you think about it on a reasonable level as well, you don't really want somebody else in there contaminating your equipment, leaving residue behind, leaving oil behind, something that might affect your end product. It'd be really pretty hard, pretty difficult to keep everything completely separate and secure. Yes, we trust a lot of people. Yes, there's a lot of professional grade restaurants and catering facilities that would love a chunk of this business. But right now, it's just not legally possible to do that. And, for safety and sanitation reasons, it may not be the best idea either.
And that's a really good point, and I've had that question a couple times. Another question we had earlier from a couple of folks in the crowd had to do with real estate and being able to go out and identify the right property, maybe create the right situation with the landlord. If any of you had that question, I'd love to get your guys' input on how you guys were able to identify the right locations. But one thing you could definitely do is don't try to be the expert on this. When it comes to real estate, I'm sure everybody in here knows a real estate agent, or you are one. But what you need to be able to do is have a 420 friendly approach, we call it, to the industry, and understand zoning setbacks and have a real good understanding what the community will and will not tolerate, and maybe Rolodex of landlords that have either expressed an interest in being able to lease out their buildings to tenants in this industry, because they know the square footage comes with a premium. But at the same time, anybody who's brand new to it may not necessarily have that exposure, that Rolodex that you're going to be looking for. Where people were turned off to it, a year or two ago, they might be reconsidering now. The industry's evolved, and so is the mentality, and now they might be looking to rent their space out to someone like yourself, a professional entrepreneur looking to enter the space, in a regulated way and be compliant, and they're willing to have that conversation. Versus 5 years ago, the kind of person that knocked on the door or called them wasn't, maybe representing themselves very professionally or well polished, and that was a big turnoff in advance. So that would be my suggestions and my advice on how you could go about maybe identifying the right property or the right agent or the right person. But I'd love to hear you guys' experience in other markets, because mine certainly comes mostly from California.
What he just said, professionalism. If you just call them up and say, hey, I'm making pot brownies, do you have any space available? That's not going to go over too well. Showing up, dressed appropriately, and having that conversation with them, explain to them what you're doing, you're licensed, you're regulated. Now these people, they view it as an opportunity to make money as well. But, educating people, these people don't show up at conferences like we do, so they just don't know. They view it as, illegal drug business happening in their facility. They don't want to get shut down. Just like he said, professionalism goes a long way.
The stopgap, though, is that you have to have your commercial kitchen set up before you can get your permit, correct? You have to have a physical address. So.
Is that how they're doing it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Absolutely.
So you have to do that. So okay.
Yeah, it's a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to have a secure facility before you can even start with the rest of it. And finding that spot is difficult. I've been through many locations for one reason or another.
Especially here in Portland.
And using a professional real estate agent that specializes in 502 is key, because we've found facilities that haven't been listed. And to be very honest, as soon as they realize it's the 502 business, the price doubles.
Right.
So using a real estate agent, using somebody in the business that may have a better angle, maybe a parcel that wasn't listed, a warehouse that wasn't listed, an area that's approved, using some other angles to come in, added to find those spots that really work best for you. But as soon as as soon as the landlord is willing to let rent to a 502 business or lease, the price has already gone up. They know there's a price tag on all our faces right now, sitting in this room.
Right, there's certainly a premium for sure, and I think the obstacles that face us are different than other industries. You've got to not only go in and sell yourself, but you've now got to sell an industry, and you've got to sell your business model, and you've got to sell your brand for that matter. So there's a few other obstacles that if you were going and doing some IT level job or trying a software business or some .com, they probably wouldn't ask you a lot of these same questions. So in addition to those obstacles, handling it with a professional and polished approach is definitely one way of it, but being able to educate that, that landlord possibly. That's where you need to be able to go in there and say, hey, here's who I am and here's what I'm trying to do. I've done the homework and your building meets the zoning setbacks, it's in a qualified zone, or it meets these regulations and so on and so forth. What I'm looking for is an opportunity to lease your space for this amount of years and make it contingent upon me receiving a permit. And sometimes being able to let them know that you've done the homework for them, breaking down some of those rebuttals and dealing with some of those no's that you're going to hear when they say to you, sorry, we're not allowed to here, or no, I don't, I'm too close to this or too close to that. If you can go in there and have already dealt with all of that on their behalf, they're going to look at that like you're a very savvy tenant, you're well educated, you're well prepared, and that's the kind of tenant that they're going to want to lease to regardless of the industry. So all you're going to do is yourself a favor, you're going to help change the stigma just even a little bit of the industry, and quite frankly get yourself into a nice leasing situation with a permission-based relationship with your landlord and yourself, and that's the best way to start your business, especially when you're trying to do it through the regulated space. Anybody have any questions that we can get to in the current? Sure, I know your hand was up and I'll get to yours next, yeah.
I was hoping that Alan could maybe share with us his experience in setting up kitchens and, what the realities have been and some lessons learned and how it translates to Oregon.
The 2 pros and 2 cons on setting up your kitchen.
Very simple. It always takes longer and costs more than it ever should. I've done a lot of restaurants for some large companies. I've built and designed a lot of restaurants. Right now, the facility we're building is 17,000 square foot. 3,000 of that is going to be in edibles. The rest is extracts and joint productions and so forth. Along with that, we're running 2 other projects in 2 different states. Along the same lines, I work with a lot of engineers. I am not the expert in everything. I am the expert on the flow and how to make it all work together and take the least amount of steps to the walk-in. But I bring in the experts for the expert job. The guy who balances my hood systems and air quality is a trained engineer. Use the experts to do the expert job. If you're not the expert, get the professional help and really plan it out properly. Plan it out from the ground up. Even if you're retrofitting a facility, really sitting with an engineer, architect, making sure that this facility can even accomplish what you want to do. I'm a firm believer in phasing out as well. I start with a single phase, a workable phase that we can start with, and then work into a bigger phase 2 or phase 3, depending on facility as well. The bottom line is this world is run by a spreadsheet still, so you still have to produce and still have to make money even while you're building out your massive facility. Money talks, and there's never going to be enough financing to cover it all. So at some point you have to actually start making the money from it. And that's really the hardest point. It takes a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort to build these facilities, and then you're sitting there going, wow, I want this instant gratification. Well, there is no instant gratification. It'll be, time before all that starts to come back and actually make the money you expect it to make. But I promise you the cost of any professional kitchen is going to be twice as much as you ever thought it was going to be. It could be, right now I'm dealing with a larger drain line than I needed. 12 grand and another week to my timeline, because I need to put a 1/2 inch larger drain line in my kitchen. And that was city of Seattle. They said, nope, you're gonna need a bigger drain line for that. So it's just a matter of, working with regulators, expecting the speed bumps, trying to predict them.
Expect the unexpected.
Yeah, expect the unexpected and know that, I know, even if I'm still scheduled to open in 60 days from now, I know there's gonna be 2 or 3 other curveballs thrown my way, and hopefully we'll be able to predict them. But, you can only do so much. So, use the experts when you can, hire the people, plan it out appropriately, and plan it out in stages and doable stages. If you try to build out 30,000 square foot at one time and you don't have 30 million sitting in the bank, then you're just gonna spin your wheels and wind up going.
Yeah, there's an expression I like to use that's really applicable to this industry, which is, if you're off by inches at launch, you'll be off by miles in orbit. And I use that to talk about the dollars that are spent. So if you're not paying attention to some of those things early on, you won't find out until much later in the process where you were off and how expensive it was really going to be, and therefore your projections now become 2, 3, 4 times what they should have been on the good or the bad side of things. But more so, you're actually not able to stick to your numbers and hit those accurately because of where you were off in the beginning. So, talking to, for example, a mechanical engineer can be really, really important. You're dealing with the city or the counties, and what they're most concerned about is the area you're putting back out into the community. They're looking at, how to protect everybody from a health and wellness perspective, but they're concerned with what you're doing in that room at the same time with what you push back out into the community. So mechanical engineers that are very experienced with our industry and with working with the city can help circumvent a lot of those problems and help you avoid a lot of expensive lessons, but also don't be afraid to start working with industry professionals that have experience. I'm not just saying that because I am one. I'm saying in your local area, people who have started kitchens like Alan, worked through this process. You can't really put a price tag on experience in this industry to help you prevent from being off by inches at launch. Therefore, you're not off by miles in orbit. So take advantage of the resources when it comes to experience and IP. They're there for a reason. And just like you have a lawyer as part of your team for the legal expertise and you got a CPA for the finance, get yourself a good industry-specific consultant that you can work with and be happy to pay and happy to help you circumvent a lot of the problems that you need to, so that you can not, burn up a lot of your working capital unnecessarily at the beginning and have what you need when you need it. I want to get to your question next. You go for it.
Great. You mentioned something about talking more about sourcing, maybe even, I own an edibles company, and
Which one?
I would love, Messina Bitters. It's
Okay.
a bitters
Free
company.
plug, why not?
Yeah, and so I would basically my sourcing comes from all organic sources, and I would love to list that, but have you ever experienced any kind of pushback from, like, say, a company that I purchase material from them, but I don't have a personal relationship with them, saying that they're not interested in being related to the cannabis industry?
It's all about collaboration at that point. Working together with your sources and suppliers. If they don't want themselves known that they're one of your suppliers, then maybe it's not your best supplier.
You can say you work with organic suppliers without listing who they are, and there's
But
nothing wrong with them, but.
you should be proud of what you do.
Mhm.
And if, we work with a lot of different farms, and we're going to definitely promote that. We're going to say, this came from this farm. We want to be transparent, where it came from, who grew it, what's their backstory. And I've got a couple very specific small growers picked out because they do an organic product, and it's a very nice product. And even though my end results is I'm just using their extract, it's still what goes into it counts. The ingredient counts, as if you're doing that market. So, building those relationships where you can co-pack or co-work together to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to advertise for you. I'm going to promote your brand, your products, but in exchange, I want something back. There's always a give and take. So just finding those right partners to really promote yourself and them as well. It's a shared partnership.
I read, I believe it was either yesterday or the day before, there was the first farm in Colorado that got organic approval. Cannabis farm, I'm drawing a blank on what it was, but yeah, I think you gotta look it up last couple of days. Yeah, organic approval, first time, so that's promising.
Yeah, and
Let that be encouraging.
It's so important now with all the new test results coming through, especially with the extracts. If there's a pesticide or any kind of other pest preventive stuff on there, and it's a safe levels when it's grown, it's a safe level on the flower, but then you extract it down to 100% or 1% of what it was, of course it's going to multiply the pesticides on there, and that's what they're finding now. That's what you're seeing a lot of news reports right now about pesticides level, different pesticides being banned, because once you extract them down, I'm sure Craig can, I'm sure Craig can take and run with this one, but yeah, it's dangerous, especially when you're working with edibles and everything else. Now you're adding that into your edibles, so using the best of the best is definitely the way to go. You can just talk about.
Yeah, on that same note,
Concentrations of pesticides.
some people say that, I've heard CO2 is a disinfectant, so if there's mold on your material, CO2 might kill off some of the mold if the pressures and temperatures are high enough, but it will not do that for pesticides. It concentrates pesticides in the final product, so any pesticides in your plant material will show up in a higher concentration in your oil. I'm sure we've all heard about the stories of recalls, dispensaries are having to pull stuff off the shelves because of it. So just know where your source material is coming from and how it's grown.
Having that stuff pulled off the shelves for what it's worth, only because you said it tends to get maybe a bad rap, but it's actually good to see that that's getting done.
Oh, of
And
course,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
I'd like to see that that's getting done. It shows that the process is actually working and they're paying attention to it. And there is that level of compliance being implemented on QC. So I think it is good, but it's a good point that you bring up. It's not something you're going to be able to hide or get away from. It's the truth will be told, especially when it comes to this. Any other questions? Who's got a question? Go for it.
Going back to extraction system methods of solvent versus solventless, do solvent-based butane or any of the solvent systems have inherent advantages over solventless systems?
Yeah, so butane, propane, ethanol, they're strong solvents. So they're quick, they're fast, they don't require super high pressures, so they're a lot less expensive in the beginning. So a butane propane system might cost $20K, whereas a CO2 system might cost $80K. Where that, the difference is you might have to build out a 40K explosion, fire spark-proof room on the butane system. So when you start adding up all the costs, I think that it's about the same. But yeah, butane propane is a faster extraction, slightly higher yield, just because it's such a strong solvent.
Thank you.
CO2 is definitely a marketing thing. It's a clean, pure thing. That's why people like it.
Is there a high level of THC with the butane or the CO2?
That's about the same. Yeah. CO2 levels can butane or propane have more THC than CO2. And no, so if you did, we were talking earlier about sacrificing yield to achieve higher quality. So in those cases, you might have a little bit less THC than if it was a butane run. But on a high pressure, high temperature CO2 run, you can pretty much pull the same amount from the plant, yeah.
Gentleman in the hat?
Yeah, so when it comes down to the recovery methods, we're talking passive or active, when it comes to getting your system certified for Oregon, trying to figure out if Oregon is going to require only, when we're talking about butane or propane, if it's going to be only passive systems or active systems with recovery units and all that.
I'm not sure with regards to butane or propane. I just don't know.
Is there a more sort of accepted way for extracting CBD? Or is it
It's the same.
same?
Yeah.
Okay.
Typical, 2 years ago on like industrial hemp, like a pure hemp strain to pull CBD was real low yielding, 3, 4, 5%. The hemp that you see in the magazines, long shoots with little flowers on them. In Colorado now they're growing it more like marijuana. So it's it's a bushy plant, lots of flowers, and now we're starting to see real high yielding industrial hemp strains matching same yields as a marijuana strain, which is nice.
We're in the process of building our facility, and we are both in the hydrocarbon extraction, just recently under the CO2, and we also distill our products. Do you recommend a separation between the three, and other than the fire department and the ODA, who do you recommend us to consult prior to building out a facility?
Not in the state.
I don't know really in Oregon who you would talk to about that. I don't see a problem with them all being in the same room, or at least close to each other.
No, you're right. And I didn't want to interrupt, but I think the room is whether or not they're separate, separate rooms or just one combined one. Their concern is going to have to do with, again, what's being done with the air that's being used and where is it going to. So I would say start with your mechanical engineer can probably answer a lot of the questions and help you address that specifically to how those rooms will be, because what you do to the environment inside while you're playing God is one thing, but once you put it out into the environment outside where you're not, that's their thing. So whether it's one room or 3 rooms, kind of look at it like that's going to be more the issue. Unless you get into spark-proof situations, and obviously you'll have to have contained rooms, which then said they come in afterwards and tell you you don't need it, but that's just the way they get around the red tape so that they're not held liable for it. We have a few minutes left, probably have time for a couple other questions. Anything else? Yeah, if you got another one.
I have a dumb question. This is probably a foregone conclusion.
Maybe I have a dumb answer.
It's just totally prohibited. If you had a CO2 machine, you wanted to take it around like a crossflow filter in a winery, you can't just go around and job to people and do extractions on site.
We're working on that.
Okay.
So right now it is illegal in Colorado for the marijuana industry. You could do that in the hemp industry or any other, you said something about a wine industry, so that's totally fine.
Right.
The marijuana industry is so highly regulated, so we're launching a mobile trailer at the moment, and we're trying to get our foot in the door in California, Oregon, maybe states that haven't got all their laws in place and are still willing to write stuff in. So we're trying to get a mobile extraction unit written into.
Yeah, we're working on, in California, we're working on a situation where just like the wine industry has, where they're farmers and they're growers, and we have a real good, a comprehensive understanding of what farmers do and don't do, and what they want to do and what they don't want to do. And at the end of the day, harvesting and trimming and packaging is not what they want to do. So understanding that processing on its own is becoming something that we're focused on, being able to bring it mobile. But also create processing plants for that to take place on behalf of the farmers, just like we do with the wine community, whereas they grow, somebody else comes in, harvests, presses grapes, bottles it, and everybody does what they're good at. So we've definitely have been working on that on a high level in California, just because of the farming community up in the Emerald Triangle and how we've had to address that before. Trimming. We have a lot of people that come from overseas, from Eastern Europe, and by the droves, that to trim product and process essentially. So we got to do something about that. Not that we're not creating great jobs, but it's hard for the quality control. So that's being done so that farmers can farm, processors can process, and retailers can retail.
Is OLCC looking at that this session at all?
No.
No. That's down there.
We're kind of focused on California, like he just said, because they haven't started really writing laws yet. There's really nothing in place. So we feel like, just like CO2 and butane, there's some states that allow hydrocarbons, some states don't. It's usually, if it's there when laws are being written, it gets written in. If it's not there and it tries to get brought in later, it's a lot harder. So that's where we're kind of focused on California at the moment, the mobile extraction. And if it works, hopefully we can take that model to the other states and get it put in.
Yeah, so on the topic of CBD from industrial hemp, am planning to expand my business to include a product that has that. My understanding is that you would need a separate kitchen for that. And I guess I was just wondering if I should incorporate my business differently, because it's essentially a non-marijuana cannabis division of my business. So I guess if you could speak a little bit to that and the different areas that would require.
So are you referring to making edibles with only CBD and no THC in it, or very low? Okay, so, if it does pass that standard, yeah, you could do it in a separate kitchen. I don't believe there's any rules that says you can't do it in the same kitchen.
That's what I was thinking too.
I mean, you should be able to produce CBD products and THC. The difference is, if you were producing a CBD product by itself without any other THC products, you'd probably save a lot of costs, a lot of money. If you were just running a CBD kitchen. That'd be a little different. You could use the commissary kitchen, you could use other facilities that were available to you, but because you've introduced THC into it, then you're stuck to the THC rules. So if you ran two separate businesses, yes, you can totally do a separate CBD, no THC business, and treat it more like a medical item. But with the THC kitchen, you can produce CBD alone, even if it has no THC in it.
Oh, one
Yes.
last question. Hector, go for it.
How are topicals being regulated? Are they being regulated like edibles?
There is not a clear direction yet.
The question was about how are topicals being regulated, and if they are.
Yeah, well, I'd like them to be regulated. That is a witch doctor medicine still. Nobody wants to put any science behind it. I'm working with some different doctors and some different collaborations to try to put some real medical science behind it. But currently, in the States, there's no regulated dosing amount or strength amount and so forth, because it's not being ingested, it's not being smoked, and honestly, the FDA doesn't believe it works.
Or they don't want to admit it.
You just hit on a word that's sort of like a gray area for me. Where do you go to learn, really learn how to correctly dose?
I think we finally started to have a standard model now, as far as 10 milligrams being a single dose. For 5 years now, I've been using labs to help regulate my dose. I test the product going in, I test the oil going in, the strength going in, the concentration, and I test it coming out. This is what I put into the batch, this is what out, here's 10 milligrams. So I've got it down to a science, but using the testing labs to really, and budgeting for the testing labs as well, to really control. But you got to start with a baseline test. Whatever your extract is, whatever you're using to infuse that product with THC, you've got to start there. What's the percentage? Right now, I'm using a CO2 extract that runs about 62%. So I know I take the math there, and I can start diagramming the batch from there, knowing how much I expect the dose to make. I can test it if it's been fully activated or not. And then I test the product as it comes out. Regulated in most states, you are going to have to test it before it hits the shelf. So if your batch, if my batch of chocolate's too strong, I've got to melt it all back down and start again. If it's too strong to the market, same thing with Oregon, once they finish up the regulations here, Colorado as well. Is it 5 here? Okay, I'm not all up to date yet. So they're saying 5 milligrams is a single dose, huh?
So we do, in California, we're running 5 with a single dose.
Wow.
Microdosing is becoming a big deal as you develop edible product lines.
Unfortunately,
Consider
edible line,
microdosing.
that's really pretty low. 10 for an average user is still pretty low. And any kind of multiple user or medical patient needs much more than that. So that's interesting. I'm sorry, I didn't know that. I've been trying to keep up with the Oregon laws because I have a lot of interest in this market here, but it's just, it changes as fast as you can read it. All 3 states do.
I think that's pretty much it for our time. I want to thank Alan and Craig for taking the time to be up here, and thank you guys for attending this seminar. I appreciate it. If you have any other questions, we'll hang out for a few minutes and address them and give you guys business cards and contact information for the future. So thanks again. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.